Okay, let's dive into this. Picture the scene, right? It's May 1968, in the bustling city of Newcastle upon Tyne. A 4-year-old boy leaves his home heading out on what should be a completely ordinary, everyday errand. Just going to buy some candy from the local corner shop. It's the kind of innocent, everyday moment that happens in literally every neighborhood around the world. But he never came back. What followed is a story that deeply, deeply unsettled a nation and completely changed how we understand youth and crime. Welcome to this explainer.
Because here's the thing. The prime suspect in this horrific, heart-wrenching crime was a child herself. Usually, when we think of serious violent crimes, our minds naturally go straight to adult perpetrators, right? That's just how we're wired. But the paradox here, the sheer unbelievable shock that the prime suspect was an 11-year-old girl named Mary Bell, is exactly what makes this case one of the most chilling and heavily analyzed in modern history. Let's break down exactly how authorities arrived at this unthinkable conclusion just by looking directly at the facts.
Part 1. The Death of Martin Brown, an Unexplained Tragedy.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because it's a terrifying escalating sequence of events. We kick things off on May 25, 1968. That's when 4-year-old Martin Brown is found dead. Then, just days later, a local nursery is broken into. Okay, strange, but maybe unrelated, right? But then comes the true escalation. Exactly 9 weeks after that first awful event, another young boy, Brian Howe, disappears. The tight timing and the proximity of all these events, that's absolutely crucial to understanding how this whole investigation ultimately unfolded.
So let's zoom in on that very first event. On May 25th, 3 kids were out exploring this abandoned house on St. Margaret's Road, and they stumbled upon something horrific. It was young Martin's body just lying there on the floor of an upstairs room. They tried to revive him, but it was too late. But here was the most baffling part of all of this. According to the official reports at the time, he appeared to have died from, quote, nothing in particular. I mean, think about that. There were absolutely no obvious injuries, no clear signs of a struggle or violence. And because the pathologist literally couldn't pinpoint a clear cause of death, the authorities didn't even treat this as a murder investigation at first. Martin was buried, and for a short time, this mystery just seemed like a tragic but completely unsolved anomaly.
Moving on to Part 2. The mysterious nursery notes. Ignored warnings.
Just days after Martin's funeral, right under the cover of darkness, a local nursery school gets broken into. Vandals get in, they scatter paint absolutely everywhere inside the building. But, and here's the kicker, they left handwritten notes. And we're not just talking about random meaningless scribbles here. Some of these messages explicitly appeared to claim responsibility for Martin Brown's death. Now, at the time, the police totally dismissed them. They figured, oh, it's just a cruel prank by some local kids, and they didn't connect it to a homicide at all. But man, looking back with what we know now, this was a massive, massive warning sign of the darkness brewing in that neighborhood that just completely slipped under the radar.
Which brings us to Part 3. Tragedy strikes again. The escalation.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how the situation escalated. Let's compare the two. With Martin Brown, you had no clear cause of death, very limited forensic evidence, and no obvious injuries, right? But skip forward 9 weeks. 3-year-old Brian Howe disappears while playing near his house, and the scene they eventually find is entirely different. After this huge search, his body was discovered on a patch of waste ground near some railway lines, and unlike the first case, investigators immediately spotted clear, undeniable signs of violence. Detectives finally put these two deaths side by side. They saw the terrifying similarities, the ages of the victims, the tight geography, and suddenly, it hit them. They weren't dealing with isolated tragic incidents anymore. They were actively hunting a serial offender.
Part 4. An unthinkable suspect emerges. The investigation. The realization that a serial offender was operating out there, that launched a massive, massive response. The investigation ramped up fast. Police started systematically knocking on doors, interviewing dozens of kids from around the neighborhood, just desperately looking for absolutely any lead. And that's when they sat down with Mary Bell. So the crucial point is, she was 11 years old. 11. At first glance, she was just another local kid. But investigators started picking up on things. Really unusual behaviors. Strange little statements that instantly set off alarm bells. And then, most alarmingly of all, she started dropping highly specific details about the crime. Details that had absolutely not been released to the public. The investigation rapidly zeroed in, and before long, the police were completely convinced that this young, 11-year-old child was the one responsible.
Finally, Part 5. Trial and lasting legacy. A nation in shock.
When Mary Bell actually appeared in court later that year, the public reaction was just instantaneous. The entire nation was reeling. People were completely struggling to wrap their heads around how someone so incredibly young could be tied to such serious, devastating violence. The court was suddenly staring down these profound, incredibly complex psychiatric questions. Psychiatrists spent hours examining Bell, really trying to unravel one core question. Was Mary Bell simply evil, or was she severely, deeply traumatized? Was it her upbringing? Did a child that young even have the mental capacity to truly grasp the permanence and consequences of her actions? These are incredibly heavy, difficult questions, you know? And the trial became one of the most controversial criminal cases in modern British history, precisely because the truth felt so much more complicated than just a simple black and white explanation.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how it breaks down the exact issues we're still debating today over half a century later. Look, the deaths of Martin Brown and Brian Howe left permanent, unimaginable scars on their families and the community. But on a structural level, this case forced society to face some massive issues. We're talking about the deep realities of childhood trauma, the very concept of criminal responsibility in youth, how we even begin to handle psychiatric evaluations for juveniles, and ultimately, society's overall response to juvenile crimes. There are absolutely no easy answers here. It's just a series of deeply entrenched debates that literally continue to shape our legal and psychological frameworks right up to today.
And so, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, unresolved thought. How should society respond when serious crimes are committed by children? The Mary Bell case is a profound tragedy that changed so many lives forever, but it also fundamentally challenges everything we think we know about innocence, accountability, and justice. Really think about how you would answer that question today. Thank you so much for exploring this complex and deeply important topic with me.